got it. Teamwork makes the dream work. Good morning, Mountain View. Let's worship together, yeah? All right, here we go.
Jesus, I sing for all that you've
brokenness and pain is all I know. I won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. Not a captive. I am not a captive to the lie. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. I won't be shaken. Won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, there's power. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. There's power in your name. Come on, like this. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Oh, sing it, my fear. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. I've searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise, and pleasures that fade are never enough. But you came along, hallelujah, and you put me back together. Every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, come on, sing it out. Oh, there's nothing, Jesus. There's nothing better than you. Hallelujah. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all. turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can.
Lord, there's nothing than Oh, sing it again, Lord. Lord, there's nothing higher, nothing wider, nothing brighter. Oh, it's better than you, oh God.
Well, good morning, all. Good to see you, both in person and online. Thanks for joining us this morning. And online folks, if you don't mind letting us know who you are, we're going to try to put a link to just a brief survey so that we can figure out how to better serve you and do a good job and identify who you are. And so if you don't mind doing that this morning, I'd greatly appreciate it. For all of us, we're working through the Gospel of Mark. Whew. And really, this video should articulate what I hope we're all experiencing, and it's this weight of change that when we started the Gospel of Mark, beginning of this year, I don't know how long ago. I think this is message 28, 29 in the Gospel of Mark, right? So sometime this year we started, and I told you at the very beginning that if we read through this Gospel and we get to know this Gospel, we get to know Mark and we get to know what he's trying to convey to us, that it will force us to change something in our lives. I just believe that. And I've seen this over and over and over. And so as we've been working through this, one of the things I know Jesus does, according to Mark, is he threatens everything that controls us. He threatens all of the power that we think we have, and he threatens all forms of power that we experience. And we should begin feeling and grasping some of this change that he's asking for us. And for me, man, I have been challenged. There have been moments where I'm like, I'm feeling it. I want you all to feel it, all right? Because what I sensed from his teaching and the invitation to discipleship His invitation to follow him, which includes things like sacrifice and generosity and surrender and serving others, man, all of this has challenged me. And some of my thinking and some of the things that I do, and I'm hopeful that it's challenging you too, right? Because Mark's gospel is challenging, it's punchy, and it kind of cuts deep for all of us. It really cuts to a level. And so I don't know about you, but I'm often tempted when I'm supposed to make a change, when I'm supposed to take a next step, when I'm supposed to make a decision, when I'm supposed to do the next thing, often for me, I will do whatever I need to do to make it the least painful and the easiest and the most comfortable, right? Make the choice that causes the least amount of pain and change and disruption and inconvenience. Anybody else like that? Right? We just are. And the rest of chapter 14 shows us the heart of Jesus. And I just want the text to speak to us today, because when I look at Jesus, Jesus didn't pick comfort. Jesus didn't pick convenience. Jesus didn't pick less pain. He chose the painful way. And if I'm supposed to be like Jesus, man, this is challenging. So look with me, Mark chapter 14, verse 12. Last week we talked about the woman who anointed Jesus, prepared him for burial, right? And now here we are. On the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to Jesus, "Where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And so he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready, there prepared for us." And the disciples set out, and they went to the city, and they found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. Does it sound familiar? It should sound familiar, because in chapter 11, if you jump back just a couple of pages, listen to this. "Now when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, 'Go into the village in front of you.'" And what do we read in chapter 14? Jesus sends two of his disciples to go into the city, and somebody will be there waiting, prepared to show them, right? And it sounds familiar, and this description that gives us the preparations of the Passover is almost identical to the preparation of Jesus coming in on a donkey on Palm Sunday. And Jesus sends two of these disciples kind of on this stealthy errand, right? How many of you would like to go on a stealthy errand for Jesus? He's like, "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go into town. Just don't let anybody make a big deal out of it. There you're going to find a person, a mysterious person, a person you don't know, but you'll know clearly who it is. So go," right? How many of you would take that assignment? Like, oh yeah, send me, right? And so in verse 13, as in verse chapter 1 and 2, in chapter 11, Jesus sent two of his disciples, says, "Go into the city," which tells us Jesus is in total control here. Jesus understands what's about to happen to him. And he's not wavering. He's got it. He's ready. He is in control. Jesus, he is not desperate. He is not afraid. He's not angry. Jesus is not anxious about anything that's about to happen to him. He doesn't cower. Jesus doesn't retreat. Jesus doesn't try to run and hide, even though he is completely aware of what this day is going to bring in his life. And isn't that what we see Jesus do throughout all of the Gospels over and over again? That the course God prepared for him, he gladly accepts and he takes. And it's not easy. It's not painless. It's not convenient. It's not comfortable. And according to chapter 16, just to put some things in context for us, the Passover had to be celebrated within the city walls of Jerusalem. So this would cause the population of Jerusalem to triple, quadruple, it would just multiply at exponential rates, right? And so the mood of the people in the city is that they're expectant. There's an urgency. They know Jesus is in town. They're expecting Jesus. If he's really the Messiah, he's going to create a revolt, and it's going to be over this weekend because everybody is anticipating that Jesus is going to once and for all deal with the Romans. But the residents in Jerusalem, they're expected to make room. How would you like to live in Jerusalem? And once a year during the Passover, if you have extra space, you've got to open it up for other people to stay in. I guess that's one of the reasons not to live in Jerusalem, right? But this is what's going on. And so there's a place that's been prepared for Jesus and his disciples. This would have been customary. And what I find really interesting, and we can't prove this for sure, but everything indicates that this would be the reality. The upper room, which is where they're going for the Passover meal, this upper room is the same place the disciples went after Jesus ascended into heaven in Acts chapter 1. And according to Acts chapter 12, verse 12, this house belonged to Mary. Not the same Marys we already know, right? Like, I think somebody was just born as a girl in the first century, and they said, what should we name her? Mary, because there's Mary. Here a Mary, there a Mary, everywhere a Mary, right? And so you got Marys all over the place. Don't mix this Mary up with any of the other Marys, because this is a different Mary. Everybody with me there? Good, you got that. But Acts chapter 12, verse 12 tells us that this room belonged to a woman named Mary, who was the mother of a man named John Mark. Think about this for a moment. It's the same Mark who likely wrote the Gospel of Mark, who traveled with Peter and is able later to write Peter's understanding of the gospel, of everything that Jesus taught and everything Jesus said. And so this man carrying the jar of water, is the very person we're likely reading who wrote about the life of Jesus. Does that make sense? Regardless, there's been a lot of preparations done for the Passover, and this Passover meal is foundational. It's a foundational event for Jesus as he reveals his heart to all of us. Just like the blood of the Lamb at Passover covers the sins of many, it'll also be true as Jesus is poured out for so many. We've been talking that Mark likes to write in the style of a sandwich. And so we've got another sandwich here where you've got two pieces of bread and you've got the meat in between. Unfortunately, in this particular Markan sandwich, the bread isn't very tasty. It's actually pretty dark and it's pretty ugly because the meat, which is the Last Supper, is surrounded by this bread that reveals the betrayal of the disciples. And the meat, the Last Supper. And that final piece of bread then is the treason, the betrayal, and the Last Supper is the meat of the sandwich. And I don't want us to miss this because it's the key understanding of the entire chapter about everything that is happening here. Because the Last Supper is in drastic contrast to the treason and the betrayal of the disciples, which is the point. And the point is what? It is not the worthy that Jesus came and laid his life down for. It's not the worthy. It's not the people who deserve it. It's the unworthy. It's even the people who are the cowards and the unfaithful that Jesus came and surrendered his life for. And it reminds me of Romans chapter 5, verse 8 that says, God showed his great love for us by sending Jesus to die for sinners while we were still sinners. And so keep this all in mind as we dig in more. Verse 17 says this, and when it was evening, he came with the 12, and as they were reclining at the table and eating, Jesus said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. And the disciples began to be sorrowful, and they started to say to one another, is it I? Is it I? And he said to them, it is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better that that man had never been born. And so this actual Passover was divided into 4 different parts. And so we know that each part was completed with some eating and drinking a glass of wine. And although Mark doesn't give us many details, especially like Matthew and Luke and John do, we can make the assumption that because they're reclining and they're eating, that this is the end of the third part of their meal. This is the end of the third piece. This is where everything starts to get a little bit more tense. And we even celebrate the Last Supper, right? We call it communion, and at Mountain View we celebrate this every single week. And it's supposed to be a time that's reminiscent of Jesus' victory, of his joy, the joy we receive because we're forgiven and because he died for us. And here, however, it's sort of a bitter irony because it's an announcement about a betrayal, about treason, about falling short. And even though Jesus says, it is one who is eating with me, and our immediate focus, because if you've been around church, especially around Easter, you already know who this is, don't you? Who is it? Judas. It's Judas. But here's the problem. All of the disciples are eating with Jesus. Not only are the disciples eating with Jesus, but there are servants in the same upper room eating with Jesus. There's women in the upper room eating with Jesus. And what Jesus says is those who are eating with me will betray me. So it's not just Judas, but it's everyone. And when Jesus says this, the disciples argue and they feel grief, they feel sadness, they're hurt. And so they start to ask the question, well, is it I? Is it I? Is it I? And the only clarification is the specific one is the one who is going to dip his bread in the same bowl as me. Isn't that true human fashion right there? We read chapter 14. We identify the traitor, right? But by the next morning, all of the disciples are going to betray Jesus. They'll betray him for greed because they were too weak, because they're fearful, they're cowards. And yet at this moment, everybody's asking the question, is it I? Is it I? Surely not me. It couldn't be me. And isn't it funny how the same argument trickles down throughout all the centuries? We gather in a grow group and you read this challenging piece of scripture and you think, well, that isn't me. Is this addressing me? Well, it couldn't possibly be me because look at that person. I mean, don't we always look for the next person who's got it worse off than me or doing worse than I am so that I can feel really good about my situation? And so they're looking around and they're saying, it can't possibly be me. Look at verse 22. And so they were eating, and Jesus, he took bread. And after blessing it, he broke it and he gave it to them and said, take this as my body. And then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. That's a key phrase. They all drank of it. And then he said to them, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. And so before Mark even wrote this gospel, the tradition of communion, the tradition of practicing the Last Supper was already in action, in motion by the early church. They were already doing this. And so Mark makes this new practice for Christians as simple as he possibly can. It's the shortest. He just keeps it bare bones. But it's interesting because there's 7 Greek verbs in verse 22. And it says, eat and take and bless and break and give and say and take. Did you see this? Signifying, what this signifies is that Jesus is so incredibly gracious. On behalf of his disciples, on behalf of his followers, Jesus says to all of us, eat and take and bless and break and give and say and take. Isn't that cool? I mean, it should be cool for us. It should be exciting because Jesus says, this is my body. And we've talked about this before. Anytime you use the word body in the Greek or the Aramaic text, it meant the whole being, every fiber of the being, right? When Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength, it meant all of you. And so when Jesus says, I am giving my body, he's saying my whole self, my complete self, my whole being. And all this signified by the verbs results in the gift of Jesus himself, holy and without reservation, totally and completely self-offering to his followers, to his disciples, as he simply says to them, eat this and take this and be blessed and break and give and say and take. And it's funny because Mark is the only gospel who adds the phrase, and they all drank of it. They all drank of it. And the all echoes throughout the whole chapter about what's about to happen, recalling both grace, the grace and the love of Jesus, and the failure of his disciples. They all drank. They all swear it's not them. Is it I? Is it I? They all swear allegiance to Jesus. They all swear they'll never leave him. They all swear, but by the end of this chapter, they all fall away. All of them. They all fled, verse 50 says. They run for their lives. And I find it so fascinating that the original Last Supper is attended by traitors and people who commit treason and cowards. And it's a table that isn't a merit earned by merit, but it's earned by grace. And the climax of this whole moment occurs in the declaration when Jesus says, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," almost as if what he said in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, "For the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom to many," as if Jesus said, only those who lose their life will find it, as if Jesus is finally fulfilling everything that's been said. Verse 26 says this, "And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them," here it is, "You all drink of the cup, which means you'll all fall away. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." And Peter said to him, "Even though they all fall away, no, I won't." I mean, doesn't this sound like Peter? True Peter fashion. Every single time Jesus has predicted his death, Peter has been the first person to say, no. You can't die. And Jesus says, I have to. Well, if you die, I die. Right? I mean, this is Peter. Peter acts as the spokesman for all of the disciples. Before the Passover meal, Jesus told the disciples, one of you will betray me. And now he informs them, you all will betray me. You'll all fall away. Jesus is saying the cross and the journey to the cross, these trials and the beatings and the mockery and the crucifixion is going to be so turbulent that you can't handle it. It's going to mess with every core of who you are, because what you believe I have come to do is not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen. And so Peter, what does Peter do? Every single time in chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, when Jesus predicts his death, the disciples respond with self-assertion and conceit instead of humility. And so here in true fashion, Peter emerges in a blustery way and he says, I'm not going to, no way. And I think verse 29 is slightly less rude than it was in chapter 8 when Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. But he's just coming out boldly. Even if they fall away, Peter says, even if all of the rest of them, not me. Not me. Almost to suggest that Peter's not surprised that the others are going to fall. I mean, Jesus, I get the rest of these losers might betray you, but I wouldn't dare do that. Like, you can feel this. And yet at the same time, the Last Supper points itself beyond the present into the future. And I love this because Jesus, even in the darkest moments of his life and his ministry at this moment, it's so crucial when we read this word until. because despite the cowardice and the treachery of the disciples, despite Jesus' impending agony on the cross, the final word at the Last Supper is this expectation that the kingdom of God is near, that it's coming, that it's present, and those who partake in the Last Supper will be grateful, and we will be living in the tension between the times when Jesus ascends and the time Jesus returns again. And so much going on here. Look at verse 32. I don't get this. I've read this and read it and read it and read it and read it and read it. I don't understand how you can be one of the disciples and be doing this life and this ministry with Jesus and get to this moment where you have the Last Supper and then have this happen. I can't get it. Listen to this. So they went to a place called Gethsemane, verse 32. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter and James and John. And Jesus began to be greatly distressed and troubled. I mean, look what he's getting ready to face. Of course he's distressed. Of course he is. And so he said to them, "My soul is sorrowful even to death. And so remain here," and what's the word? Watch. Remain here and watch. Do you remember the end of chapter 13 when Jesus says, "I can't give you the signs of the second day, but stay awake, be alert, watch"? Here it is. He says to his disciples, "I've been talking about this for days, for weeks, for years. So what I want you to do is I want you to be here. I want you to be alert. I want you to be awake. I want you to be ready. That's what I want you to do." And going a little farther, Jesus fell on the ground and he prayed that if it were possible that the hour might pass from him. And so he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you, so remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and he found them sleeping. How do you do that? He found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Could you not watch and pray 1 hour that you might not enter into temptation? Peter, don't you know that the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak?" Like Jesus kind of rebukes them and says, "Have you not been paying attention to what I am telling you?" Like if I was Jesus, it wouldn't be so kind. "Peter, what's your problem? Wake up, stand up, stand on your head if you have to. Don't fall asleep. Why are you falling asleep? Don't you know something big is about to happen? I've been talking about this. What's your problem?" That's not what Jesus says. So you'd think he would, right? You think, oh, that would rattle his cage enough. Oh, no. And so Jesus went again and he prayed. And he said the same words. And again he came and he found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came back a third time and he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. See, my betrayer is at hand." And I get to this part of the text every single time. And seriously, my head just is like, how are they missing this? How are they missing this? Because what Gethsemane does is it challenges us to think that Jesus really is the Son of God. And there's this moment of greatest intimacy, this beautiful moment between a child and his father where he cries out, "Abba, Father," in this moment and pleads to the Father only to get no as an answer. And Jesus is set on the course of the cross. And listen, unless we come to terms with this, unless we come to terms, we have not really begun to understand what it means to say we're Christian. It just doesn't. Because all of this forces us to ask ourselves, are we like the disciples? Full of swagger, full of energy, full of excitement, taking the world by storm? Are we like the disciples who in one moment are full of swagger and the next moment we're asleep? Are we too like the disciples who one moment we are fueled and fired up and ready to go, but the very next moment we walk around as confused people? Are we ready to betray Jesus if it suits our own comfort? Are we prepared to betray Jesus if it suits our own plans? Are we willing to betray Jesus even if he doesn't do what I expect him to do, how I expect him to do it? Now, we can look at the disciples and we can say, oh, clearly they're all messed up, but let's look at us. Let's look at us. Are we ready to keep watch for him in the garden and to share in the same anguished prayer? Are you ready to live in the tension of the garden where something is about to happen but hasn't quite happened yet? Are we prepared? See, we're supposed to live in the tension of these two great moments. There's confusion. There's attack. There's direct attack. There's false loyalty. Are we ready to stay with Jesus, with him in the garden until God's work is complete? Will we be alert? Will we be awake? Will we be ready? Or will he find us asleep? Ticked off and irritated because it's not going my way. Because he's just not meeting the expectations that I think he should be doing. Because as I look at the world, if Jesus would just do this, 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 and this, life would be better. Don't tell me we don't have that attitude, because we do. As followers, are we willing to stick with him in the garden, be ready, be awake, be alert? Let's jump down to verse 66. You can read the rest later. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, Jesus has been arrested. You can read that. As Peter is below, and Jesus is now at Caiaphas's, and he's on trial. And it says this: as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came. Peter is intimidated by a middle school girl. And I know those of you who have middle school girls at home are like, you should be. I get it. And seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and she said, oh, you also were with the Nazarene Jesus. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. Because earlier, just a few moments ago, do you remember? Even Jesus says to Peter, Peter, you don't get it. You talk a big talk, but the reality is you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows twice. Peter, you talk the talk, but you're asleep. Peter, you talk about how strong you are and how everybody else will fail me, and you never will, but I find you asleep. And Peter, when it's going to be the hardest for you, when reality sets in that I've got a task to accomplish, and it's not what you think it's going to be, the turbulence of this journey, you won't be able to handle it. And all it took was one servant girl, probably the age of 12 or 13, asking him one simple question. And what happens? He denied it. And he said, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. Could you imagine the hairs on the back of his neck standing? And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them. He's one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them. Look, you're even Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter broke down and wept. Can you feel this? Can you feel the tension that exists in this day in the life of Jesus? Because he's betrayed. There's an act of treason by Judas. But he's forsaken by the other 10. They all fled. They all went and hid. But Peter, he publicly renounced Jesus. One of Jesus' closest friends, and Jesus stands alone in this moment, absolutely defenseless. What Jesus has to do next, he has to do by himself alone. No one else can do it. No one. And while Jesus is undergoing some sort of formal trial with a formal hearing, with formal questions, in the heart and the soul of Peter, a different kind of trial is going on. Mark leaves us looking at Jesus, and Mark leaves us looking at Peter. In chapter 14, in awe, in dismay, in total and complete confusion, maybe realizing for the very first time what Jesus had said, that the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life up for many. And that laying one's life down, he will find it. But to find life means you will be empty forever. And suddenly, everything in Peter's world begins to finally make sense. And if I want you to know one thing about chapter 14, just one, I want you to know this, that Jesus doesn't lay down his life for the worthy. He doesn't. Rather, he lays his life down for the unworthy, even the cowardly, even the unfaithful followers. Jesus never surrenders his life for those who deserve it, because I don't deserve it. And I can only speak for myself. I know that I am unworthy of everything beautiful in chapter 14. And I, like Peter, would like to stand up and say, I would never do what Peter did to Jesus. But I also know who I am. And I'm not making a judgment. Well, I guess I am. But you're not worthy either. And the whole point of Mark's gospel is this should move us to change. This should move us to being different. This should move us from decisions that we have to make, for next steps that we have to take. This should move us to not just seek what's easy and what's comfortable. But what we read about in chapter 14 reminds us that we should be like Jesus. And sometimes being like Jesus means it's going to be uncomfortable. Sometimes being like Jesus means it's going to be painful and disruptive and inconvenient. But Jesus, for me, even being unworthy, never took the easy, comfortable, convenient road. For me, who is unworthy, Jesus took the hard, painful, inconvenient, disruptive, uncomfortable road. And I should be willing to do that too. And if you don't feel the weight of change, I don't know what to tell you. If you don't feel this, man, spend some time reading chapter 14 over and over and over again. Because when you come to the same grips and the same understanding I did that Jesus didn't lay his life down for the worthy, when you understand those sitting at the table weren't there by their merit and their goodness and how talented and gifted and whatever else they were there because of God's grace. And I sit at his table not because of what I've done or who I am or what I've accomplished or how talented or gifted I am or not am. But I only sit at the table of the King because of his grace. Every week at Mountain View, we participate in the Lord's Supper. And I know that a lot of different people come from a lot of different traditions where it's once a month, once every 5 weeks, whatever. At Mountain View, we do this every single week. And when you came in this morning, hopefully you were given a small cup. And this is what I want you to do. I just want you to grab your cup, hang on to it for just a second. So I want us to do something before we take our own time and we think about what this really means, because this piece of bread, it represents Jesus. He said, this is my body and it's broken for you. And then you've got the cup of juice. And it should take on a new meaning for us today, at least for today. Because when we all drink of this cup, we're all like Peter and James and John and Andrew and the others. We drink of this cup, and sometimes when it gets hard, we bail. Sometimes when it's inconvenient, we deny Jesus. Sometimes when it's painful and too hard and inconvenient and disruptive in our life, we're just like the others because we drink of the same cup. So I want this bread, I want this juice today just to mean something different to you. And I want you to ask yourself, what is the weight of change? And before you eat the bread, before you drink the juice, I want you to just turn around, maybe the person next to you, and just simply say, listen, this bread represents the body that's been broken for you, and this cup represents the blood of Jesus shed for you, and emphasize that for you. It's important for us to remember today by the person sitting next to us that, hey, you're unworthy, but he did this for you. And because of that, we find worthiness. And so say that to the person sitting next to you. Eat the bread, drink the juice. Ask Jesus, what does this mean for me? God, today I'm just thankful for who you are. I'm thankful for your plan and the plan you had for Jesus. And I'm thankful that Jesus walked that road. He went down that journey. He followed your plan. Even in the midst of his agonizing prayer, pleading for something different, he was obedient and he followed you and he trusted you. And I I am the recipient of something beautiful because of that. And I stand here in a room with other people who are the recipient of something beautiful because Jesus did that. And as I read Mark chapter 14, I'm challenged. I'm challenged because I tend to always want to do the easy thing. I tend to always want to do the comfortable thing. I always want to do the thing that causes the least amount of pain and change and inconvenience. And yet, if I've learned anything about Jesus from chapter 14, is if I want to be like him, then I lean into the discomfort. And I lean into the pain. And I lean into the change. And I lean into the disruption. And I lean into the inconvenience. That to be like Jesus means that often I take a road that's hard and bumpy, not straight and smooth. That to be like Jesus, I have to put my plans on hold. And to be like Jesus means that I don't get frustrated and abandon him or deny him or reject him because he doesn't do what I expect him to do. Instead, I just want to follow and trust him. And so help us do that. In Jesus' name, amen.
You are here,
Moving in our midst.
I worship.
I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker,
Promise keeper, light in the
darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. I worship you.
You are
Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
You are
Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God,
that is who you are.
that is who you are. That is who you are.
Waymaker,
That is who you are. That is who you are.
Waymaker,
That is who you are. That is who you are.
Waymaker,
That is who you are.
Waymaker.
That is who you Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 That is who you
Made a way, made a way. Oh,
Woo! You believe that? Yeah. Well, hey, just one easy step. One simple step. Not easy. The challenge is every morning when you wake up this week, will you surrender to yourself? Will you die yourself? Will you be willing to do what Jesus calls you to with the people Jesus calls you to, even when it's inconvenient and uncomfortable? Man, if you don't know Jesus like that, if Jesus isn't the Savior of your life today, man, I would love to talk with you about that and get to know this Jesus who's changed the world. I'll be right here. If you're online, email me. Man, I'd love to talk. Man, thanks for being here today. You're dismissed.